Mevrouw Estelle Sietan. Hello, everybody. So, Sietan, last two sessions. This is the worst of the two, graveyard. Everybody had enough food to eat. I think it was a masterstroke on the part of the caterers to cut those wraps in quarters or in halves. They went a lot longer or a lot further than the mini burgers did yesterday. So bleak about that. I only had two. Everybody had enough food to eat. Those were slight burgers. Those wraps in. Any comments so far? Something that is on your mind, you'd love to put out there? Prof. Clarence, do you want to talk to us about creative procurement? Have you thought about it versus innovation, maybe? Even if it's just something you're still curious about. Is anybody in the room to reflect on something that has been shared on stage? Perhaps remark about it? It must surely be. I mean, there's too much intelligence in this room. Yeah, Sean, go for it. Anybody else? Skulk? You're never shy to say something. I'd be surprised if you are today. Sismandi Safanela from the Department of Science and Innovation did come to me during the course of the lunch break saying that you'd like to share something. I don't know what it is. So when you are ready, Sismandi, so you can just put on the microphone. So in that order, Sean, Skulk, Mandisa, and then finally, Jonathan. 2 minutes each, just to get us to be in that space again. 2 minutes or even less.
Thank you. I was just reflecting on the defense panel earlier and their budget for R&D, which has been significantly cut. Is that not the essence of this conference? That we want to try and achieve the same level of innovation and innovative outputs, to do that through a procurement process and not necessarily through an R&D process. So we've got to find a way of capturing the lessons, the intellect, what defense has done to achieve that in their partnership with CSR primarily and others, but to achieve that through a procurement process as opposed to direct R&D.
Fantastic point. Yeah, I mean, it's quite staggering. Between 94 and now, 550. That's pretty much nothing. I mean, 550 or 6 billion then. Can you imagine what it was able to do on the strength of our currency at the time versus what the 500 million is probably doing or falling short of?
Can I add to that? Now we've got R1 trillion.
That's pretty much nothing
of public procurement spend.
Exactly.
How can we leverage that to achieve the innovation that the defense industry has achieved?
Bearing in mind, to complement your point, that the initial investments in innovation are capital intensive. You reap the benefit over time. It's less over time, but initially you have to dig deep and dig properly deep into it. Number two, Skulk. Say something nice. To complement.
You wish. I'm just wondering, have we done enough to focus the innovation agenda? So the big ticket items in our country is unemployment, health, water, housing. And do we see the adequate focus of the innovation agenda and machinery to solve that big ticket items? Then second thought is we cannot divorce this discussion from commercialization. And I think we should, when we talk about innovation, be able to express ourselves on an acceptable yield, old-fashioned return on investment. That part, the commerciality, I think needs a little bit more probing.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Number two, Mandy.
Be able to express ourselves.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think I was just thinking on is it Prof.
Very much.
Eurus?
Yukins.
Yukins.
What did you say? What did you say?
No.
That's his
no.
new name.
Yukins. I was just reflecting on his presentation and what he had said, and looking at where we are, and considering what is plaguing us as a nation, where we come from, and we'll talk about this young democracy, which is no longer young. And I believe that the people that are in this room are some of the most amazing and brilliant minds this country has. And at what point I hear us asking ourselves who and how and what, and we don't get to a point where, I think it was Isaiah earlier who said, oftentimes the answers lie within us, and the solutions, we carry the solutions, but however we want to look outwardly for these solutions. Now, as a public servant that is residing in the Department of Science and Innovation,
Yeah.
you get to see what investment government or South Africa has been investing in or deploying within its people, and at what point do we realize that return on investment, like Skalk is saying now. And it is precisely that where we say, instead of importing, how about we start to utilize our own, and be intentional as public procurers or public procurement practitioners with regards to supporting what the DTIC is doing with industrialization, and become a real voice, because we are the ones that are on the ground. We know what we're dealing with, and shift a little bit from looking at things from an eye of corruption, and say, how do we start to improve things? How do we start to do things from it? Because now, the moment we think corruption, there is no way that we're going to think
people detach.
Then we need to be bold enough as public procurement practitioners to say, if we want to advance innovation in our nation, and we know that public procurement is the vehicle that we can use, and it is a tool that we have currently to improve even the simple thing as lives. And it is about that, after all. It is about improving lives. And
To tell you the truth, she didn't come to me during the break, but I'm just so glad that I actually just called out, because now you've inadvertently made the point that there's a lot in this room that without the outlet remains nothing more than potential. So thank you so much for honoring the request to breathe something into it. Prof. Claren, creative procurement, innovation, answer your own question.
Yeah, I've been reflecting on the risks of using someone else's buzzword. But let me do three. There's a 24-page document from Treasury to back it up. So let me read a couple of sentences and a couple of bullet points. So from this document, it says, during many engagements and discussions, a strong sentiment came from municipal practitioners that South Africa's legislation and regulations did not allow for thinking about procurement in, and I'm quoting here, different and innovative ways. In response, the city's support program initiated an investigation of the barriers to creative procurement. And then the key messages in this document are, one, a lot more can be done within the current rules and regulations. Two, the legislative and regulatory environment does not prohibit creative procurement. And there is an implicit rather than explicit permission for municipalities to do things differently. I think there's actually resonances with what the CFO was saying this morning.
Is he still here, Mr. Logard? Mr. Logard. Oh, no, sorry, the CFO, Mr. Yeah.
Excuse me.
So sorry, yes.
Creative procurement does not mean trading off robust, compliant procurement for better results. In fact, creative approaches produce better and more credible results. Creative procurement is a more mindful and intentional approach to procurement, and so does take more effort and time. Last bullet point, so I guess. Regulatory reform is useful, but not sufficient. More important, developing capacity, capability of people, institutions, and systems to explore, design, and experiment with different procurement approaches.
Awesome, awesomeness. Mamunzali, but I did see your hand. I'm not going to take your hand because I know you're going to ask a question anyway after the speakers in this coming session have made contributions, and I think I'll reserve your substantive contribution to that with your permission. I absolutely do not mean any disrespect. Prof. Gio, you've got plenty to work with here. I don't know how many of them will actually become your students, but for those of you who are interested, you will not meet a nicer, more laid-back supervisor than this oak here. I'm using the word oak deliberately because this is how comfortable one can really be in his presence, albeit in the academic context anyway, mentor-mentee. Let's move on, folks. Thank you so much to those who have indulged my request just to sort of get back into the substantive and thinking caps on. I mean, I would imagine many of you as well are starting to think of what potential articles to write in an academic context or contributions you can make in mainstream media. That's also important, as is what you can take back to the entity from which you come so that we can redound this conversation. It can't just be a conversation for conversation's sake, but it has to make some meaningful and tangible differences wherever we are. And wherever you are, you can start. However you might start, you can start, and you start small. Mrs. Stell, Setan. Did I say that right? Setan. Askies toch. Verskoon my, ne? No, I wouldn't say Satan. No, I wouldn't say Satan. Chief Director, Strategic Procurement in the OCPO, Office of the Chief Procurement Officer and National Treasury. The time now is 14:23. I'll be back here at 14:45.
Thank you. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen in the graveyard shift. So after this presentation, if I go for my next interview for another job, they may ask me why I'm leaving my current job. And I think the answer would be is because I'm going to get fired. But don't quote me on that. So just for interest's sake, the National Treasury, or I've done a little bit of reading last night just to determine what is our current consolidated spend in government. And the most recent ones that I could get that is consolidated, and it's from the Reserve Bank, is that we are spending about 931.5 billion. So it's close to the trillion that Sean mentioned. And we are at 15% of GDP. Okay, so if that is an indicator, from the countries that I've seen, it ranges from between 12 and 20. So South Africa is around 15. So just to maybe get to the presentation itself, I'm from the CPO, Office of the CPO, and there's quite a lot of work or expectations from us. And just to put it in the context of a modernized public procurement system, is a lot of people ask us, so what are you going to do about modernizing public procurement? And every time we get into that conversation, people tend to link it to technology or to corruption busting or to professionalizing. So I thought, let me just go and write a paper on what is considered to be a modernized public procurement system. Very rudimentary, still work in progress, but at least it's a document that we can refer to. So this is just the context in which I'm going to present. So we are looking at things like digital transformation, which is at the top. We're looking at simplification and standardization, strategic sourcing, market engagement, that's not new, sustainable procurement. People link that to green procurement, but it's broader. Then we're also looking at the big drive on professionalization and capacity building, especially now on the verge of the new bill. Then governance, monitoring, and compliance, since we are going as a Treasury, we want to move away from a rule-driven approach to a principle-based approach, which I think a lot of people might be very happy about. Value for money, innovation, and then transparency. Transparency is embedded in digital transformation and all of that, but I wanted to just elevate that. So if we go to what is procurement for or of innovation, and I mean, we've seen a couple of definitions through the last 2 days or so. And for us, it just means that it's procuring, it's the process in which procuring institutions wants to acquire goods, services, or works, and I've heard buildings as well, that is not readily available in the market or that requires a specific solution or a specific development of new solutions. So in our public procurement bill, the word innovation is in 4 places. And I think we shot ourselves a little bit in the foot. Don't quote me. In clause 22D3, it's in the objects of the Act. It says that the uniform Treasury norms and standards that Treasury must issue must, among other things, stimulate economic development by supporting 1, 2, 3, innovation. Okay. Secondly, one of the functions of the Public Procurement Office is to promote the use of technology and innovation and learning. It should have actually been different bullet points in my view. Then a third one is under the preferential procurement policy, where the departments will have to develop their own policies. And we say that this policy that is envisioned must include measures to advance transformation, beneficiation, industrialization, innovation, creation of jobs, and so on. The last space is again linked to technology, that we must make use of technology and innovation to promote the effective procurement. So where I come from as a strategic sourcing practitioner, everybody is familiar with the Kralchik matrix, where we say that nothing can be procured in the same fashion. Currently, our default is open tender processes, and nobody thinks about the approach to the market, or that you can't buy stationery the same way as you would buy capital equipment. So in our environment, or in the environment of innovation, it will probably fall within the strategic quadrant and the bottleneck quadrant. The strategic quadrant is obviously where you need to foster some relationships, long-term relationships, co-development of solutions. And in the bottleneck environment is to come up with new solutions to ensure the risk of continuous supply, to make sure that we come up with new solutions to overcome the bottleneck effect of some of those commodities. So I know Prof. Kuno spoke about relationship models earlier in his presentation. So in our revised strategic sourcing methodology, we brought this in, where in anything that you procure, you would know in advance what kind of relationship you would need to enter into a contract. And it also depends on an economic model, whether it's outcome-based, output-based or performance-based, and whether it's transaction-based. And based on that type of economic model, you would also have your relationship model, and then there's 4 different types of sourcing models or contracting models that you can then venture into. So those are the 4. Then scenarios, because this is something very new to us, in the sense that our procurement current procurement rules are not that explicit in when and how procurement for innovation should be done. So these are scenarios of where procurement of innovation may be relevant. So it's usually in emerging technologies where we are seeing that there are new and emerging technologies that have the potential to offer solutions to existing problems and that is not widely available in the market. Where there is complex problem solving required. In other words, where we need customized or specialized solutions that are not readily available. Specific public sector needs, and especially in our societal challenges that we have, improving public service in general, and then developing some innovative infrastructure projects. In research and development, when we want to engage with suppliers or with other government institutions like the NRF, like the TIA, and other research institutions to co-develop new solutions or new technologies. Customized solutions, and we have a couple of examples here in terms of something that is bespoke and very tailored to government. And I think e-filing is one of those examples. And there we talk about long-term relationships, and that's a swear word in government, long-term. The next one, if we carry on, it's risk mitigation. We spoke earlier in this conference about the freedom to fail. In the private sector, there's usually about a 20% built into the freedom to fail. In government, it's seen as fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So how do we overcome that? Market failures is another one, where you put out a tender and time after time after time it fails because the capacity is not in the market and you need a specific solution for that. Long-term perspective, again, swear word. We need to look at how do we overcome and evolve to adapt to longer-term relationships or longer-term contracts without blocking or locking ourselves into unfriendly relationships. Strategic goals and objectives. I think this is where we want to involve, or let me say, we are quite embedded already in our strategic objectives and goals and our socio-economic goals. So that is quite embedded in our procurement process already. But I think when it comes to newer technologies and newer innovations, how do we approach our SMMEs, our innovators, to make that easier for government to procure or even co-develop things with those suppliers. And sustainability and environmental goals. So in a lot of aspects, some of these projects that aims to achieve environmental or sustainable objectives, we may need some novel solutions there as well. I'm going to try and speed up a little bit. Number 11 is social impact initiatives. And then lastly, digital transformation. I think we all know what it means and what is meant by that. So I don't want to go into too much detail. Then some key aspects of what procurement for or of innovation is supposed to focus on. It must be a problem-solving focus. We have to focus on problem-solving. So we need to identify specific problems that needs some solution, engaging with suppliers and innovators. There we want to say early engagement in the market, and that's another swear word in government. We need to see what measures and things we need to put in place to engage with the market in an open, competitive, transparent manner. Flexible contracting, oh my word, that's a bigger swear word. Flexible contracting and performance-based contracts are very rare. Even incentive-based contracts is not spoken about very favorably. But this is where we need to look at how we structure our contracts to be more flexible and adaptable, and should be able to evolve as the project unfolds. Risk sharing, I just spoke about risk sharing and the freedom to fail. It's not there, and this is where we need to engage and with innovators to share some of the risks. And I think we've touched on long-term perspectives as well. Intellectual property considerations, obviously, Prof. Edquist mentioned intellectual property rights and when does it apply and who owns it, and that must be cleared up at the very beginning, or at least some clear rules and regulations or even guidelines need to exist there. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, because of the experimental nature of innovation and innovation solutions, I think it's crucial for us to make sure that there's mechanisms in place that monitors the progress, that evaluates the outcomes, see if there's an impact, and at least learn from those projects. I think that then goes to the next point of knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer, because I think what is happening in government is that we are becoming weaker in terms of our own capabilities and knowledge, and we are depending more on private sector and consultants. And we want to retain some of that knowledge, at least. And then we have to think about the benefit just beyond the current or the immediate. So this again speaks to the broader or to the longer term relationships and the snowball effect that this will have in terms of innovating or establishing new industries, job creation, and then obviously an improved public service. I'm not going to go into this. I know that Ron looked at me and he said, don't talk about this. But I want to just say that the Treasury, and part of the bill is that there is mention in the bill about procurement methods, and it is work that we are currently doing. And that's where I'm saying big work in progress on there. So don't shoot me for this. I have listed here about 13, and as far as I know, Ron has got like 100. Sean and Ron has developed something like 100. I want to see that. So now what is required for us to implement procurement as a tool for innovation? And what I'm saying is that currently our most common challenges that we face in procurement of innovation relates to risk aversion, that compliance driven instead of principle driven and outcome driven, our skills and capacity and the political support. So what do we need? I think earlier in the conference, they spoke about a country strategy for innovation. We need to embed policy strategies with defined targets in all spheres of government in their innovation policies. We have to set up the legal framework in such a way that there's understandable definitions, common understanding, guidelines, procurement methods that are innovation friendly. Okay, I don't want to say this too loud, sufficient budget. Professionalization is a key drive for us, that we need to build the skills of people that's already in the system, as well as uniform job descriptions, uniform competency framework for people coming into the public service, and then raise awareness of all the work that we're doing, specific training at all levels of decision making, and then also, and most importantly, is to collaborate with other government institutions, with academia, with civil society, to actually look at how do we develop this collaboratively so that everybody is on the same page going forward. Thank you for that. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Estelle. Much appreciated, despite your very loud whisper. Shono, that's what you do best, isn't it? Come on through, brother. Now, I've got to remark on this bloke. Sean Scott, every Wednesday for an hour to two, has a procurement platform, procurement discussion platform. Estelle, what's in your hand? The clicker. Every Wednesday, 10 o'clock, for an hour or two, depending on how robust the engagement is, this kind gentleman here has a master class where he brings in whoever is the relevant person to conduct a discussion on that particular topic. So if it's competition and procurement, he knows exactly who to call. Sorry, Estelle, I nearly robbed you of your wine there. And I know Skulk was eyeing it properly. A round of applause, please, Estelle. I beg your pardon. Thanks, Estelle. For those of you who are interested, Sean, please make it a point that you just talk about your platform, because it is quite easily the cheapest university I know on public administration in this country. And whilst we are at that, may I please ask that Sean's panel, Professor Lynch, Eukins, Dr. Allen, and Professor Kino, come through. Tools and mechanisms for employing public procurement in support of innovation. Now, this is the one panel that can really run away from us, because Gio is there, he's the organizer, and he can just pull rank on me. Do not allow him to. At 15:20, Mr. Scott, we have to take the break. So do what you must, however you do so. And thank you so much for being here. By the way, you've handled the acoustics and the technical stuff with great skill and aplomb, especially in the context of this load shedding. And I've been watching. This has really been a good show. You've done well. You can give him a round of applause, everybody.
Thank you for the opportunity. And just a quick one. You asked me to talk about that particular university, and thank you for being a lecturer on that at point. And many of you, we often call on to talk. It's something we started in lockdown, and Henry and I gave up on it a couple of months after lockdown, when we thought things had settled down, and we got a phone call from somebody to say, Sean, we're carrying on meeting every Wednesday, and you're welcome to come back. And so we've continued with that process, and it's really a complete collaboration for practitioners and professionals in public procurement, and that's extended into a Telegram chat platform as well. And there's a YouTube channel as well where many of the recordings are placed. I started in public procurement in about 2005, when the Treasury Regulations 16A and the Municipal Supply Chain Management Regulations were issued, and I've been working in that space ever since. For some reason, I volunteered to give a talk on innovation and public procurement at a seminar about 10 years ago at a local seminar here, and it was a complete flop. I spoke about it, I was excited about it, but everybody just stared at me, blank stares. Sean, what are you talking about, using procurement to buy innovation? And so I've continued to focus on that, and of late I've taken a great interest in working very closely with Mr. Ron Grace of the NRF on identifying the methods that are available. And the title of this particular panel is on mechanisms and tools. And because our public procurement bill makes specific mention of methods, I'm going to squeeze methods into this methods, mechanisms, and tools discussion. And if you were to look at South Africa's current legislation, the methods that we currently have, and I'm just going to be talking here about the PFMA, and I recognize that the municipal local government sector has very similar methods. We've got really petty cash, and we've got quotations, and we've got the normal competitive tenders. We've also got what we now call other means, which is more popularly known as deviations. That's sole source or single source or limited bidding. There are the transversal term contracts, which are mentioned explicitly in the current regulations as well as the new bill. And we've also got what we commonly term piggybacking, where you could piggyback on a contract of another institution. And then we also have public-private partnerships. And that's really what our legislation currently gives to us. And in researching and having a look at what else is out there, there's typically two groups of methods, if you like, and those are very often innovation-specific methods, procuring R&D services, newly developed products and services, and sometimes referred to as another group called innovation-friendly methods. And those are regular procurement practices that either favor innovation or they certainly do not hinder it. And so if we look then at what those different innovation-specific methods might be, and these are what are documented and used across the world in the US Broad Agency announcements, commercial solutions offerings. In South Africa, we're already starting to make extensive use of challenge-based procurement, prizes, hackathons, crowdsourcing, contests, design contests. Indigenous innovation is something probably more of a philosophy and a program that China uses. Innovation partnerships, described extensively in Europe. There's fast, better, cheap, and more recently FIRE, which was set to be used for the Pathfinder mission. There's forward commitment procurement, which is used a lot in the UK. I'm not sure if it's a lot, but it's really to try and help manage that valley of death that was spoken about earlier. Laboratories in South Africa, we have a number of those going as well. The living labs in that Human Sciences Research Council are busy with. The US is something called Other Transaction Authority, where it's a bit of an exemptions type process. In the UK, they talk a lot about pre-commercial procurement, public-private partnerships, public-private innovation partnerships, if you like. There is Public Procurement of Innovation Solutions. There's the R&D centers, which if you heard during the earlier panel, that's primarily how the Defence Force has been working. They go to CSR and they ask them to do some research development for some solutions they might have, rapid technology prototyping, and then the discussion we heard from Professor Chris Jurkens this morning on small business innovation research, small business technology transfer, and in the UK sometimes called small business research initiative. And there's the other one, which is actually also listed in South Africa's practice note, called unsolicited proposals. And even in New Zealand, that there's a rule on how that should be handled. Some of the innovation-friendly ones, agile acquisition, probably more of a philosophy, collaborative sourcing, community-based procurement, really, really interesting one. You saw earlier, Kenya's actually got that listed in their regulations, their legislation. There's competitive dialogue, which we'll certainly talk about some more. In the EU, competitive procedure with negotiation, and there's the deviations, of course, which we can continue with. Early market engagement, it's asking the universities or the non-profit organizations to do some work for us. It's framework agreements. There's a whole range of those types of framework agreements that are out there. Functional specifications, we heard this morning. There is putting in, and this was from Jacob Edler's presentation yesterday, just putting in innovation criteria into a conventional bidding process. There's long-term agreements, negotiated procedure without prior publication. There's outcome-based specifications, which was mentioned as well yesterday. There's partnerships, public-private partnerships, requests for proposals. Requests for proposals, World Bank has described 3 different models of that. The third model is collaborative, competitive dialogue. And many of us would know that as being something you have a problem and you go out for, and you ask for solutions. There's stage contracts, milestone-based. There's 2-stage, which was mentioned as well in Kenya, or multiple stages there might be. There's various contract types that are appropriate for this space that you might be using. There you can see fixed price incentives and cost plus incentives are there as well. And there's a combination of those. And I think we heard earlier, what about community-based challenges? So we could certainly mix these up. So there they are. And the questions then to the panel are these. And the first one is, we have a country, we have a continent where we do not have at the moment very innovation-specific methods. Are they needed? And why? The second question is of those that you're aware of in the countries and the markets that you've been working on, which are the ones that are more effective if we had limited time, limited budget? Which are the handful that we might want to prioritize as a country, as a continent? And then what might some of those implementation success factors be if we wanted to start to try and put those in? So I'm going to ask each of the panel members if they could please just go through and maybe address, let's just start with the first one. Do we need innovation-specific methods in order to make this a reality? Professor Chris Yurkin, honored to have you on the panel. Thank you. Your thoughts.
So I'm tempted to say no, actually, that the more radical methods that you've mentioned aren't necessarily going to be required. Starting point, and this is informed in part by the UNCITRAL experience, the UN Model Procurement Law experience, where the UN Model Procurement Law was written by a large committee that had to work by consensus with some very stubborn people on it. So we ended up having many different types of methods, some of which were extraneous. And the commentary that was written afterwards really stressed that you want to narrow down the number of methods that you have, because otherwise it's difficult to monitor their success. What's really interesting, we're trying to build capacity in our country. We're basically doing the same thing as you're doing here at the state level. At the federal level, since World War II, the federal procurement system has been building on lessons that start from our Revolutionary War in the 1700s. So we have this really mature system. At the state level, not so much. State and local level, not so much. They can sometimes are extraordinarily mature. So we're trying to pass lessons learned to our own countrymen, within our own country. And it's a really interesting question, because you can go, so for example, you could go to the United States. Sure. You could go to the United States, or you can go to Europe, and you can see other methods that are being used. What we've done internally is to start to use economic analysis, basically game theory, to say, okay, what if you use this method here? Would that work? So you talked about, for example, using an innovative approach to perhaps in using frameworks. For example, if you wanted to reduce the amount of energy used for lighting in here, we use framework agreements that are called energy savings performance contracts, ESPCs, where they're a form of mini public partnership. And a company will come in and say, we'll cut your lighting costs in half if you let us take over the whole system. They replace the lighting with more efficient lighting, and then they share the savings. They're shared savings with the government. And this has been so regularized that we've been able to actually do these through frameworks. There are framework agreements that are used for this. To look at other models around the world and then say, would these work in South Africa? So for example, you talked about community-based challenges. Bid challenges actually turn out to be organizationally a form of a whistleblower system. And the reason in most countries around the world, the challenges are limited to just the next best bidder, because the next best bidder is in the best position to assess what went wrong. But that's not necessarily true. You can look around the world, and there are some systems that allow a taxpayer in some of our states, a taxpayer can bring a challenge. And you say, well, I could take a risk on something like an energy savings performance contract to reduce the lighting costs in this room if we had community-based challenges, if we allowed more people, so that John could for example, could bring a challenge and say, no, this is just stupid. So drawing on different models from around the world and then running them through an economic organizational model in your head to try to see whether or not these would work, much like you would test a weapon system by seeing how it reacts in various environments. And that's the important part, not just to take the model from around the world, but to work in game theory to try and figure out how it would work in this particular environment.
Barbara, you're based in New Zealand, but you've got experience across Canada and Europe and
Yep, that's true. That's true. My initial answer is yes, but in typical academic fashion, right? I think every country, region will need a menu of both innovation-specific and innovation-friendly methods, and only you will know what those are, given the conditions that you've determined to be important, given the context that you've determined to be important. Now, probably a shorter menu than you've provided with us, which you'll work through and figure out which ones are the most important at which time. Now, having said that, let me just tell you a little story that tells you a bit more about what I really think. When I was looking at moving to New Zealand, at the School of Government, there was a professor who had started teaching a course called Procurement, Contracting, and Collaboration. And I thought this was within a Master's of Public Management. And I was really excited about that because that was quite unique, actually, at the time anyway. I know there's some around, but I was really excited that that was there, that he had already started it. It had been running a few years. He was an old Marxist and had a very specific way of teaching that course, but really good guy. And so I sort of shadowed him and saw what he was doing, and he was retiring. So I took that course on, started networking around town, because in Wellington, everybody knows everybody. Within a few years, you start to know which procurement officials you want to come and talk to your class and all of that. So I had a senior procurement official from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade come with a small team, and very exciting. I got to know him quite well over a few years, and he came and did a session to the students. And what he presented to them was a new method called procurement in a day. He had developed a methodology within that ministry with his team for an effective procurement in a day. And he made it work, and they do it. And I just thought, wow, okay. So he had the freedom to do that, the knowledge to do that, the ability to see through what he was going to get in trouble for, what he wasn't going to get in trouble for. He was training his team in it. They had that sort of excitement and energy and passion that I'm able to go and do something like that. And then other ministries have picked that up. And I just thought, wow, okay. So these are the conditions for innovation-friendly development of procurement methods in this case, but also for the specific ways in which to do it. So I think it's that context, not tying officials down too much, such that you're able, providing the conditions, providing the training, having a really effective and ethical, such that one can talk about that public sector set of officials in your procurement realm. So that's some of my thoughts around that.
And yourself, Jane, deep in the Wales environment and procurement and innovation?
Something that I didn't mention yesterday is that 1 in 3 children in Wales suffer extreme poverty. That means they don't have food on the table. That's shocking, isn't it? Okay. So what I also didn't tell you is that our governments are facing 40% year-on-year budget cuts. So we actually have a lot of parallels with you, except your spend is a great way higher than ours, okay? But I think the principles remain the same. I think that applying innovation across expecting every municipality to apply it in every category of spend is aspirational. It's not practical. Robert Hanfield gave a very good slide up there yesterday, and he talked about what I think is your foundational economy. He talked about the sectors that are important for your economic growth. Now, for me, if you're going to address innovation in a strategic way, that's where you need to be looking. What sectors do we need to be applying innovation, and then thinking about the procurement that's relevant to that, and that might not be necessarily relevant. So the types of procurement that we use frameworks, as we've discussed a lot. We use normal tendering process and the competitive dialogue, etc. We also use a lot of DPS, dynamic purchasing, direct purchasing. And that's particularly relevant for small businesses who quite often are the most innovative. So that's where there's a lower spend. So I think those are some of the more successful approaches. And I think in terms of methods to generate and infiltrate this culture of innovation that we've been talking about, definitely regional challenges, challenge fund. So city deals, for example, I don't know how that compares with what we have here. So at the moment, we're doing a study of city deals across the UK. And we're looking at the extent to which they have collaborative spend within those city deals, and whether a city deal actually generates more collaborative working, which we would like to think leads to more innovation. So I think we can talk a lot more about that in a moment, but I think definitely thinking about the challenge, the outcome of what you're trying to achieve before you think about how that then translates into procurement is very important.
Thank you, Jane. Professor Giacchino, you did some research recently on some of the methods that are being used in some of the research institutions or across the country. Maybe you could share some of that with us.
Oh, yes.
Do we need?
Almost, I was thinking, what reason? No, now I remember. Yeah, so I mean, just in a general sense, I do think in our context, we would need both of those. And I think on the one hand, we would need packaged procedures, pre-packaged, off-the-shelf procedures. That's quite advanced in terms of a kind of conditions to allow entities to pursue innovation, where probably, you would have very few rules and just broad principles. At the same time, I think in our context, it is incredibly important to have very strict and very clear conditions on when, and probably more importantly, who should be allowed to use that. I just don't think that we are a system where you could just plug this mechanism into a regulation, say, there you go. It will be an unmitigated disaster. And what will happen is immature procuring entities, of which we've got many, will mess it up. And then the mature ones who can sensibly use it will suffer as a result. And we've seen that, right? So arguably that's what's happened with piggybacking in South Africa. Used to be used very effectively for a very particular, and then a small number of immature municipalities messed it up. And now the AG has just turned that tap, and so but I think we do need that. I think we are still, especially in this phase where we are now, because I think we are very much in a culture where people are not going to stick their neck out. I mean, everyone is not the NRF. So, I think entities like this, where we've got officials that's willing and, they've got everything to do it, few and far between. So if we want a little bit of broader uptake, I think we'll have to give quite specific guidance. But at the same time, if we want that spillover effect, if we want to see more, we need to make the rest at least friendly. And I fully agree with what my colleagues have said. I think it's less then about pre-packaging or going to New Zealand and taking their method and putting it down here, or even the EU, or even UNCITRAL. And more about breaking it down and figuring out on every step and every aspect, So there, I think a little bit like somebody stripping a car. And it's not about the engine as a whole. It's about, and now I'm going to go out on a limb because I know absolutely nothing about what's going on behind the hood of a car, but taking the spark plug and figuring out whether this spark plug can work for our purpose, and then the carburetor, and now I'm out of terminology, but doing that and figuring out every part of it rather than thinking of packaging. And I say that because I've seen too often on our continent that what Chris has referred to in the ancestral model law, and that's a function of how that thing is created. But that's not well understood on our continent, because you go and look at laws based on the ancestral model law, and they include each and every one of those options, which is madness. No system can do that. And yet it happens, right? I can give you easily half a dozen recently created procurement laws on our continent. It's just a cut and paste, and that's just not useful.
So why don't you keep the mic? And are there certain methods that you think would be worthwhile cutting and pasting, or cutting and adapting and pasting? You say yes, we need methods in both those categories.
Yeah.
We can go from there to Jane.
Right. So I mean, if I were to cut and paste, I would do a benchmarking exercise of framework agreements, because there are so many different modalities of doing that. So I would do a proper benchmark to see whose is working best for our purposes, who can give us, or then even a mix of those. That's where I would start, because I think for me, there's the most potential benefit there. It's something we've already started experimenting with, but we get it often very horribly wrong. It's completely inconsistently used in our system at the moment. I mean, some of these are so-called frameworks we've got in South Africa, panels, as they're often called here. It's nothing more than a pre-qualification followed by a procedure. Now, so I think for me, that is where I'll start. I'll go and look at good, solid, robust framework and bring a good package to South Africa.
Thank you. Methods. Okay, so something that I am a very strong advocate of is innovation partnerships, but they're only relevant where the spend is very high. We use the CRALEX framework, so I was really pleased to see that today. It's a really great way to start working out where you need to inject innovation and where it's going to be most likely to succeed as well. So innovation partnerships can be considered as very high risk, but actually it's where if you've got high level strategic spend, you've got very few suppliers in the market, and there is obviously opportunity for some unscrupulous activity, should we say, then maybe this is the area where you need to have that much more closely managed. An innovation partnership would allow you to do that. The idea there is that if you're looking for radical innovation, it requires high level of R&D cost. Who pays for that cost? I think the big thing we have to remember about good procurement is good procurement can only happen if the supply market is ready for it. So you can put out your framework, you can raise your tenders, but if the supply market doesn't actually have that capability, and it takes time to build that capability, one of the biggest challenges for the supply market is scaling up to supply the public sector. This is very different from supplying the private sector, because we end up they have to scale up at speed. So the engagement with the supply market is absolutely critical. And the innovation partnership, we have trialed it in a two-phased approach. And the first phase is really enabling you to engage better with the supply market, enable them time to invest in the R&D. And the actual first part of the procurement is that they are bidding for the R&D funds to develop in partnership with you. The partnership bit quite often gets dropped off the radar, and everybody just focuses on the innovation. So I think that's a really important point to raise there. The idea then is that they do develop innovation at the end. Either party has got the opportunity to withdraw at the point at which the prototype has been developed. So that means you can either go back out into the market, or you've got the option to procure straight away without having to go back out to the market. That saves an awful lot of cost in procurement. So I think but I would only really recommend that for radical innovation where there's high spend. But I would definitely go back to this community of practice. And I think that, so the Cardiff Capital Region, for example, where you've got 10 local authorities and a number of health boards and other public bodies, have decided to take this approach. And the Cardiff Capital Region actually have funds which are specific to particular categories of spend, where they know they're part of our foundational economy. They're problematic when it comes to procurement, and we know that the innovation doesn't currently exist, and healthcare projects would be a really good example of that. So they spend time running workshops, they do it in partnership with the university, and it helps them to better improve the innovation. By developing that community of practice, it enables more businesses to be involved in that procurement, particularly smaller businesses. And the idea then is that if they develop the solution together rather than individually, it means that it's going to benefit a much wider population of our demographics. So, and obviously 2 heads are better than 1, so it brings together. So I think there's that, there's much more security there in terms of better outcomes. I think that's a really important factor. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. On that menu you mentioned, what might we add to it?
Widely used, but not more effective. Public-private partnerships, I think, are appearing more and more, and there's lots of literature about them, and there's a lot promised, but a lot is lost in resource, time, money for a lot of ambition that is misplaced, but that's maybe another conversation. But that was on your list, I think. So I'm sure there's innovations buried in them somewhere, sometimes, but something to be wary of for sure. I think, I'm not sure it's on your list per se, but I think a package of good digital strategies and particular methods is going to be a way, ultimately, hopefully, to be more efficient, to save money, and to enable procurers to do interesting things. So things like I've seen actually a conflict of interest management tool being created digitally. So you're able to enter in at the beginning of a procurement, make conflict of interest issues that may be in place, which is something New Zealand is dealing a lot with. Not corruption per se, we call it conflict of interest. Digital clause libraries, content builders, all of that sort of stuff. It doesn't sound very innovative, but getting it online and procurers being able to go in and go, oh, I can use that, and I can use that, and I can use that. And boom, you've got your contract. Well, it's harder than that, but you know what I mean. And then finally, digital marketplace, which was brought up yesterday or maybe on Monday, in terms of allowing suppliers to become part of the marketplace where they are pre-approved, so it gets part of the procurement process done. And then they're able to say, I can offer this in cloud services, I can offer that in whatever categories that you're able to create. And I think that's really driving some innovation and providing opportunities to the sector that weren't there before. And it, I think it drives innovation in a number of ways. It cuts down time, and some various countries have got them now. And I think we're starting to see some payoff, actually. So it doesn't have to be done from ground zero. But again, it's I come always back to conditions and context. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thanks, Barbara. Chris, if you were to put competitive dialogue on that list, maybe just kick off by explaining to the audience what it is, if you were to put that on the list.
No, I think it's essential. Competitive dialogue, we call it competitive negotiations, and it in essence is how you buy a car. When you buy a car, you go out and you negotiate simultaneously with multiple car salesmen as you're trying to figure out what the best value is, the best quality, and the best price. You go into those. When I negotiate with a salesman, I always say, Sam, I like you a lot. And the salesman's always happy. And I say, Sam, the most important thing for my friends like you know what the most important thing? He says, no. I say that you tell me the truth. That's the most important thing. My friends always tell me the truth. You're going to tell me the truth, right, Sam? And he said, worried, but he said yes. And the reason for that is because the competitive negotiation unlike the open tendering, the government is putting the solution out and asking for the lowest price. In a competitive dialogue, a competitive negotiation, the government is taking in information, just like you take in information when you buy a car. So it's an entire shift in paradigm, and it means ancillary things like fraud laws to make sure that Sam is telling you the truth become really important. But it will open up the possibility of getting new solutions in the marketplace. What I was going to recommend is that these weekly sessions you have, that you make them international. I mean, I've trained across Latin America, trained in Central Asia. I always get the same question from contracting officials, which is, how do we continue this discussion? And I usually working with US agencies, and they don't have a latitudinal goal of building capacity. So I say, well, why don't you guys have a weekly program, and I'll volunteer to help with it. Why don't you do this? And they're not interested because they're there for diplomatic reasons. They're not there for building capacity. But if you did your programs, and it would give the community here an opportunity, as Heo says, to break the engine down and see how in the test bed. So for example, sustainable procurement. Sustainable procurement outside the United States means three things. It means social justice, it means economic sustainability, and it means environmental sustainability. The Obama administration, to give an example of a different type of engine, the Obama administration decided, because we have so many social justice programs, so many racial-oriented, women-oriented, we have so many social justice programs, the Obama administration made it solely about environmental, because the Obama administration was afraid that if a next administration, like the Trump administration, which is much more conservative, came in, they would tear down all the environmental measures. And it turned out to be a perfect strategy. So sustainability for us means only environmental. The Obama administration started it. Trump basically ignored it because it didn't have any social justice issues wrapped around it. And now the Biden administration arguably has the strongest green procurement measures in the world, partly because of the strategy. So ours isn't necessarily the right approach, but it's another approach, and your weekly programs could work through those concepts.
Thank you. So we have this on record. Would you help us get that international? And,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Glad to do that.
Well, why don't you stick with the mic? I mean, so you're giving us some ideas on how we implement this in a successful way. Any other thoughts on implementation success factors in making this work?
There are easy benchmarks. So for competitive dialogue, competitive negotiations, it's relatively easy to trace, because competitive methods are really easy to ask contracting officials to report on. And I told you our data, it's 60% using competitive dialogue. The Europeans prove how easy it is, because the European Commission has a regular report on cross-border procurement that lists the competitive methods that are used, and you can see the Europeans lagging way behind the Americans, largely, I think, for reasons of inertia. So in terms of implementation, measuring success, asking the agencies to report the competitive method used is a reliable piece of data.
That on? Yeah. Couple things related to what Chris was saying, in the sense of evaluation and building that in early, not waiting to decide at the end of a project, oh, we better evaluate and figure out what was successful and what just my opinion, it's a failure across public sectors, across many, many countries, that we don't build that in early enough. For some reason, we think it's easier to do it later or something, but it's very important to build that in early, and then you know whether it worked or not. And my second point is much more esoteric. Courage, I think. A courageous public sector and a courageous public officials, and the environment for people to be like that. Because who's innovative, right? You need to feel confident. You need to feel excited. You need to feel courageous. And I realize that's easier said than done. But if we can encourage that, I think it'll be a success factor.
I couldn't agree with you more. When I talk to senior procurement officials who've led very successful change, they always say the same thing. And frankly, it's usually due to personal circumstances where they just stopped caring so they could be courageous.
I definitely agree on the evaluation criteria and communicating that clearly. That's so important. But I think my main point is language. It's that we we use the label innovation, but actually it comes in many forms. And I'm just going to give you one example. The challenge fund examples that I gave you, by bringing suppliers together, bringing university representatives, by bringing experts from particular groups who are known to be professionals in this area. There's a lot of free knowledge out there, and how you inject that knowledge. These challenge fund opportunities can help you to inject new knowledge in. And one of the knowledge areas that was brought into us through a conversation in a challenge fund was, we haven't heard enough, is about circular economy. And actually, they said, well, actually, you know, there's a supplier only 30 miles down the road making this made fully recyclable materials. And that supplier knew somebody else. And I can tell you that our entire business school, we have 3,500 students every year in our business school. Our entire business school had a makeover using recycled materials. So every single office, we've got over 250 staff, every single office, every single lecture theatre, everything in that business school has been made with recycled materials. We don't call that innovation, but it is. So I think language is really important about, you know, don't scare people off by saying innovation.
Yeah.
The first thing is, do we need to buy it new? The second thing is, so we actually have a portal where the public sector can trade furniture and all sorts of office equipment, and that, I don't think it's not as widely known as can be. That's innovation as well, but we don't necessarily label it as innovation. So I think that, you know, innovation is really about being more sustainable. You know, I hear that actually we've got lots of other problems here, then perhaps we haven't got time to think about zero carbon and embedding social value, but actually you can do it. And I think it's just this language, I think we need to be very careful of that. But I think that there's a lot of really great case studies out there, and I know that all of us would be able to share those case studies with you. The Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply and many, many other professional bodies like that has a platform full of videos, case studies. They offer webinars which are free. In fact, when I run my webinar once, a couple of years ago, for the local community, there wasn't a single person from the local community. They were nearly all from overseas. So I think take advantage of those things as well. But I think that's really important. But I think language for me is the big one.
Oh, wow. I like that. Thanks, Sean. Two things that Dr. Allen said that really got me thinking are about community of practice and then sharing spec and clauses. And, you know, in South Africa, I've actually forgotten about that, and she reminded me now that in Gauteng there was pre-COVID exactly such an experiment. And low tech, really just, I've now procured security services. Let me just upload this thing. They do probity audits here as well. So, you know, the final product has gone through some probity. Now I upload it just into the cloud, nothing fancy. And the next person needing to procure security services can just go there. Now, that is a innovation. And I think we need to do more of that. So for me, I think the most important thing around this topic is to ensure that we've got a real community of practice where we're taking everyone along with us, including those that's overseeing us. I think it's really important. Too often we exclude them from these conversations. We build capacity within that community of practice, which doesn't mean that everyone knows everything, but you know somebody else who does. And I think that's important. And then for me, the final point is, as in South Africa, we are now really looking at reform. I think it's important that we all check our ambitions in terms of thinking of this reform not as an event, because I think we do. We think of it as an event. It's not an event. It's a process, and it'll take long. So we, and I think that's a typical mistake we make in South Africa. We put the rules and the law in place. The event has happened. Now we're done. But that's just the starting point. I think if we start to think of it like that, we might make progress. Thanks.
Are you what?
We're finished.
Okay, you are. Okay, I know you are. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Chris, Barbara. Chris, where are you going? Jane? So sorry. Here, where are you going? Oh. And what is that for? Oh, yeah, I forgot. I tried my best, Skulk. Okay. Shall we give a round of applause to the wonderful panel? as we give Gio an opportunity to officially thank, as he has been doing for the last 2 days, to the one member on the panel who hasn't yet received his good tidings. They are over by 5 minutes, so that affects you. So this is what I propose, because I really don't have too much room now, because closing time is closing time. There's traffic, people have to catch flights. So may we please do this? First of all, if you don't have your pair of glasses that you had earlier on today, please come make contact with me. They are somewhere in reception. If you've lost a pair of glasses, they have been found. I just hope it's one person and not 2 people, because then we might have a problem. 15:25 is the time. 15:35 we're back. In other words, we're just literally getting tea, biscuits, and coming to consume all of that inside here. Now, this is the final game I'm going to play with you. There are far too many people in this room who have been very attentive, but we are none the wiser as to their thoughts. There are people who have been here, who haven't put up their hand, who haven't gone onto stage, who haven't even made casual contributions. You know who you are. In the US, Prof. Eukins, you know, Socrates' method. I look at you, if for whatever reason my eye lands on you, CC, in the black and white stripes, you are that person who's going to contribute something, whatever that something is. So best believe you've got 10 minutes to prepare. When we, and that's not an invitation for you not to come back to class, of course. No. First of all, come back to class and come back prepared. You've got 10 minutes. We need alternative voices. Thank you. Okay, guys, tell your friends I was joking because now I've got 3/4 of the class not here. That was not the point of things. Sean, I think I overplayed my hand there, didn't I? I think I overplayed my hand with that. Please.
I'm not hearing. Testing, testing. Testing, testing.
Ladies, gentlemen, if I scan around the room, far too many people are not making eye contact with me. Look. And those who are have been on stage. So I'm going to start on my left here. Where my finger stops, you are going to make a contribution. No, I'm joking, guys. We don't have the time. You can all breathe a collective sigh of relief. But what we certainly are going to do now, we're going to have to move with the program, please, with your indulgence. This session has 3 papers. The first one is virtual, followed by 2 in-person presentations. I'm going to call the 2 in-person speakers to stage at the start, but we're changing things a little bit. So if you are following on the program, there's a slight modification, nothing substantively. We're just going to start with Mr. Grace, who's already on stage, to engage us on the opportunities to use public procurement for innovation in South Africa, the NRF particularly as a case study. The time now is 22, so I'll be back here 5-2. We'll do 15 minutes here, and then we move on. Thank you, everybody.
Is the presentation up there? Right, well, so colleagues, we tried something new. We were going to get a video, a YouTube video playing, because during COVID, when we were all lounging on our couches and watching YouTube, I learned something about procurement, and I thought I would share it with you. Can you all hear me at the back? So we can't link it, but the link is in the presentation, and that'll be available to you. But all the presentation does is it shows a house, and a drone comes to the house, and it does an electronic knock on the door, and it's got a bag attached, one of these deliveries, and the woman of the house, you know, goes and takes the bag and opens it, and it's a whole lot of pregnancy stuff. And she says, but I am not pregnant and I did not order this. And it was an illustration of artificial intelligence used by Amazon that, based on her search history, they were able to predict before she knew it that she was pregnant. And at this juncture, at this stage of her pregnancy, she needed what was in that particular bag. And, you know, it's about 54 minutes, it's about 54 seconds. And it was just an interesting idea of where procurement could be in a positive sense. The rest of the YouTube is very negative about Amazon and metadata and how they can control us. But it was just nice seeing how you can use metadata. I'm just going to be sharing some thoughts and ideas and even developing concepts. And because it's a case study, I have that freedom. So if you're not seeing the golden thread, that's the freedom I have. Because of time, I'm going to be going very quickly. But the point I want to make is that a few years ago, South Africa was characterized as being two worlds, the developed and the undeveloped. I think there are more than two. I think there's at least a middle one as well. But the trajectory I'll be adopting is that if we are doing world-class innovation, if we are providing a world-class scientific infrastructure, we need world-class procurement, and we need to be at the cutting, if not bleeding edge, of the procurement of innovation. And that's why, you know, we've all spoken about soccer and rugby, but when we won the contract to roll out these radio satellites throughout the continent, at that stage it was equivalent to winning the World Cup of Science. That's how significant it was. I'm just going to go through a little bit of theory because it does contextualize. So every new major innovation, invention, whatever we call it, enriches our lives almost immeasurably. An example here in this quote is just about the discovery or the invention of electricity. And the quote just says, you know, the mere fact that we now had electricity was more valuable than the entire value of the stock exchange at the time. This is how profound these discoveries are. And this just illustrates that when a private company does research, they are looking at their own private interests, which we call the private good. But a public good, like the internet, etc., has a profound impact on all of us. And there's a nice diagram there, which separates it and gives it in sort of economic terms. But we all know that were it not for the invention of the wheel and the phone and all these things, you know, I mean, we live better than royalty used to live in the past. And that's the average person. Now, when we look at the public good, and this is where we go into, and again, I'm just giving you threads, is transformation is critical in the South African context. And by that, I know internationally transformation means, you know, just changing things or transforming things, and it's a very broad term. In South Africa, it's equivalent to Black economic empowerment. So I'm using that term. And in South Africa, we have the particular opportunity that if we can get Black entrepreneurs at the beginning of a discovery process, and they own it and commercialize it, just think of the potential of owning the wheel, of owning electricity, of owning the internet, of owning a lot of these things, and what that does in terms of growing the economic pie. Now, because we do astronomy, I thought I'd find a nice picture. And this is a picture of a stellar nursery. And what that means is that it's a place where stars are being born, are being created. And the question I have in South Africa at this point is do we need a procurement of innovation nursery for the continent at this point in time? It's not, these centers are being used throughout the world. South Africa hasn't put one together. And when we've got discussion time, maybe we can get input in terms of that particular thing. We've heard from National Treasury that there's a move towards a rules-based approach, which we wholeheartedly welcome. Sorry, a principles-based approach versus a rules-based approach. Just as well you corrected me, Estelle. And if we do a comparison internationally, why is it that all the principles are not the same when it comes to procurement? For example, in Europe, they have two principles at a political level, which they translate into the SCM, which is proportionality and is subsidiarization. And those are great concepts, and we can do PhDs on each of these in relationship to SCM. And I'm just suggesting that that's a good one. We also use equity in one of our 5 principles in South Africa. I don't think it's been adequately defined in South Africa, but if we did define it in terms of our existing law, I still think it's too weak. And I think that the UK's law on equity is far superior. So I just want to say that that is a particular suggestion for future research. And then, of course, we use terms like competitive. That's one of our principles. Does competitive mean you can't be collaborative, you can't be cooperative? Because remember, when you're procuring innovation, partnerships and collaboration are critical. Are we in contravention of that particular principle? So the next part is just what we've experienced as the NRF in trying to just deal with the basics in procurement. So the basics in procurement is you want to do it quicker, easier. You want to make sure you get better quality at lower cost, very simply. And one of the top universities in the world allowed us to have insight into their process. And I'm just sharing with you what they do. It's a user-led process. SCM are not buying, the user is buying. The user goes onto the internet and they click and they buy. There's no financial involvement, i.e. the finance department don't issue an order and don't approve an order. It gets paid instantly. The user is the controller, is the payer, and there are defined rules. Now, it sounds outrageous when you brought up in our context where we've had a rules-based approach, and also if you're financially trained. It just, I mean, there are 100 questions. But is it just this one rogue university, or is it happening in the United States? And I stumbled across an article by Professor Christopher Eukens, and when I heard he was here, it was, wow, this is the author. But in the United States, they are doing what this university are doing. They have gone out and they've said, we want to allow users to buy. And this is up to 3 million rand. The particular university has far lower threshold, but purchases up to 3 million rand, and you can go and click on Amazon or on Fisher, I forget the site, and another site, they've got 3. And I think Amazon, when I was speaking to Christopher Eukens, you were saying Amazon, I think, have about 95% of the online market. Now, again, you know, when you brought up in SCM and you brought up in a rules-based approach, and you have the extent of fraud we have in South Africa, it just boggles the mind that this could happen. But think about what's happening. It's happening quicker, it's happening cheaper, it's maybe happening better. And yes, we have more questions than answers, but those are just thoughts. And I've got some other models which I won't go into. And but these options where you can just click and buy, is you don't just do a click and buy tomorrow. it takes a considerable investment of time and agreements and making sure the controls, etc., are in place to make sure you don't end up having that system abuse. So it's like, you know, going from A to B. The quicker you want to go from A to B, the more you have to spend. You know, a rocket, I think, is probably the quickest route now, but it takes a while to create one, and it's very expensive. Now, the legal side. And it seems like the procurement bill will not become an act very quickly in South Africa. That's a big thing for us. But let's say that we wanted to have an enabling legal environment to do the procurement of innovation. What would that entail in the current context? So in South Africa, as in most countries, there are principles. We have 5. What sets South Africa as, well, it's not just South Africa who has this this sort of exception. I can't use the word exception here, it's going to be all over me. But in some countries, there's not just one way of procuring. They allow others. For example, in the United States, in 1958, when they were abysmally losing the space race, they realized that if they use the normal process of procurement, they're going to lose. So they created the Space Act, and the Space Act used the term other transaction. And over time, it's now become the term other transaction authority. And I'm assured that the word authority summarizes very well what is a procurement approach. South Africa has 3. Not just one. So we have, and what I'm going to share is a proposal, it's a construct. Professor here has asked that you don't publish this because he's planning on doing an article. And I want to thank Mark on our board for challenging us in our wording on the parliamentary consultation, because this led to us putting this construct together. So in South Africa, we actually have 3 procurement authorities. The one is the one that we all know is that whatever you procure must be fair, equitable, cost-effective, competitive, and transparent. That we all know. We also have 2 others, and we've given terms to these, so that we're saying there's a section 2172E, which is a preference authority. That authority is different from the 2171 authority. We also have a 2172B authority, and we've given it a provisional title of a Protection Advancement Authority. We provisionally called it the Grace Kino Authorities construct, because this might take off, because there's not just one authority, there are 3. And this makes that distinction very clearly. Now, those last 2 authorities are not subject to the normal rules. They are more subject to principles. You can never breach the principles. Even in the United States, the other transaction authority is always subject to the principles. In South Africa, those last 2 authorities have a caveat that these are subject to a framework. So the regulator needs to approve a framework for those 2 authorities. And for every category that you identify within each of those particular authorities, you will probably need a separate framework as well. So of course, what we are trying to say in a very long-winded way, how am I doing for time? Not okay, is that we would like the procurement of innovation to be elevated to the status of a category within the 2172 construct, which means then we are not subject to the 2171 authority, we are subject to the 2172. And that will be then subject to the framework. So we can then do the space race stuff, and the stuff we do all the time, without being bogged down in the rules, which we are assured are not going to be burdensome, but you never know, and will help us. And in order to do this, there is a process, and we are developing a unique method to do that together with National Treasury. I won't go into details. And I'm almost at the end. And I just said, these are just threads. They are just thoughts, they are practices, they are ideas. But when we put our strategy together, we said we wanted to be a thought leader. That included doing things like international conferences. This is one example. We said if books didn't exist, let's make them. And of course, the Procurement of Innovation Center, you've guessed what my own views are there. I'm finished. So just to tell you, after this conference, we're hoping to have another one next year. And that'll be on the topic of methods and of specifications. And we're not sure that anybody else in the world has had such a conference, or that there is an authoritative book on either of those two topics. So this will be seminal, and hopefully we will have our first book length guideline for each of those two. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Ron, of course, is the head of supply chain management here at the NRF in South Africa. So you've got everybody you need for next year's conference in this very room. You've got the implementing agent, you've got the MC, you've got the renter crowd. You don't need much. So let's move on. Let's go to the virtual platform, please, with Professor Andrea Petruccio, Procuring Innovations for a Better Society. Does open innovation deliver strategic outcomes in public organizations? Professor Andrea Petruccio is the Department of Marketing and Logistics College of Business at the Florida International University in the United States. I would say good afternoon, but it's more appropriate for me to say good morning, Andrea. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the virtual platform. Of course, I can't stand next to you to make you in any way uncomfortable if you start going over time, but I can guarantee you this. Here we've got two things that I've got an advantage over you on. Load shedding, so it'll just cut you off, or I'll just instruct the guy in this room to cut you off. So you have 20 minutes minus X, not 20 minutes plus X. And the bigger your X, the bigger the bottle of wine that will be shipped to you from Stellenbosch.
Okay, I'll try to do my best. Thank you. There you go. Okay, so I hope that you all see my screen. So thank you so much for having me. There you go. Thank you for the introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. The subject of my presentation, as the title can say, I slightly adjusted based on the original communication, is touching up on a topic that is not too much common in research in the public sector, which is open innovation and the role that procurement can play in implementing open innovation approaches within procurement of innovation. So the idea is that, I mean, this conference is focused on innovation. So you have talked a lot about the role of innovation in public services and the role of procurement, but I just want to spend like a few minutes about it. So innovation in the public sector is not just an abstract concept or a buzzword. It's crucial to address some of the most important challenges: climate change, urban planning, healthcare issue. All of this is solved and it is advanced thanks to innovation. So, for example, if we take the case of healthcare, innovation is not just in new treatment, but it's about trying to identify with external company preventive measure and curative solution. And so it's a way that how we approach and we introduce new technology in healthcare, and that is only possible thanks to an innovative approach to the delivery of public services. So even in the public sector, there is the need to keep up with the technological advancement in order to deliver services that meet the need of citizen or any other stakeholder that interface with these services. So the question becomes like, how can public organization face this challenge? How can the public organization implement innovation in the delivery of their public services? And what we have been noticing is that in response to this challenging and evolving landscape, public managers and governments are increasingly turning toward collaborative and open innovation approaches. So basically, we're seeing a shift from traditional top-down methods to more like participatory models that involve innovation activities. This put an emphasis of the so-called concept of open innovation. So open innovation is a concept that has been first conceived in the private sector. So basically is that paradigm that in the private sector pushed organization not to just rely internally on internal ideas and resources to innovate, but they should actually engage with the innovation network and innovation ecosystem to create innovation in their product or services or whatever. Now, the question is how this concept can be translated into the public sector, because the idea of open innovation in the private sector was that thanks to this bigger effort, so collaborating with other partners, organization can then gain some competitive advantage on the market, can provide better service, better product that give them a better positioning in the market. Now, this is not applicable to the public sector. So how this has been, how this can be translated? So in the private sector, basically, what we are seeing, open innovation still leverage external sources of innovation to innovate public services, but with the idea that by doing so, public organizations are able to better tackle societal challenges. So the idea is that public organizations should use open innovation because it provides them with a better ability to take grand challenging by partner with external organization. And when I talk with grand challenges, again, I'm talking about climate change, improve sustainability, support local communities, and all the strategic objective that public organization aims to achieve whenever they design and deliver their services. Now, how does open innovation take place in the public sector? I just summarized a few examples here. There are many, but they can span from program launched by organization, for example, ARPA, as recently announced, a $10 million support to startup and other like high-tech company for the development of early stage energy innovators. So basically ARPA define what are the general requirements, and they collaborate, they support financially small and medium enterprise and startup for the development of energy innovative way to create and deliver energy services. Open innovation has been used by NASA for years now. Probably they are one of the pioneering of the implementation of open innovation in the public sector. So every year they put money down and they put challenge to engage with private companies to provide innovation in the space and the aerospace and defense area. But there are also other ways to do open innovation, like for example, the so-called challenge. So like citizenscience.gov or challenge.gov. So these are platforms where public organization, US, UK, they define an innovation problem and they collect ideas from outside. They can be private citizens, they can be companies, and then they award grant to the better idea. Or innovation can involve open innovation can directly involve citizens. Like there is a very popular case, which is also become like a case usable in class, of Mexico City. A few years ago, Mexico City, they implement an innovative service for monitoring bus route to reduce air pollution and traffic. And they implemented technology that involved directly citizen participation through the smartphone. They were able to like communicate in real time the traffic in order to optimize bus routes. So they can, again, deliver a bus transportation service that is more optimized and efficient and in line with citizen needs. So they're an example of open innovation involves citizen engagement directly. So all of these show us that through the years, this concept has permeated even more the public sector. So the question becomes, as the public sector is starting introducing open innovation, and this open innovation approach, more than traditional innovation approaches, the typical separation of the decision making, I define the requirements, and whoever is involved in the process deliver the solution without any involvement from the public organization. This type of approach is able to provide better outcome. Not just, I'm not talking about better cost, better quality, I'm talking about strategic outcome, as I was saying, better innovation outcomes, support to local communities, support for minority business, better environmental sustainability, better support to climate change. So this type of outcome seems to be tackled more effectively when open innovation approaches are in place. So the question becomes, how can public organizations favor the adoption of open innovation? And that's when procurement comes into place, because clearly there are several areas through which public organization can do innovation, can introduce innovation. The key concept is that public procurement in this process is a strategic asset. Why? Because public procurement is the way through which public organizations actually acquire innovation. Public procurement is the process that put organizations in contact directly with external companies that will deliver this innovation. On top of this, other than like being a process, in this conference, you have discussed a lot about how procurement, other than just being a process, is connected to a series of strategic aspects, because it's a catalyst for sustainability, it's a catalyst for innovation, is a catalyst for technology utilization. So procurement align with the idea of we use open innovation to deliver broader societal objectives. Because it's implicit in the procurement mission, the fact to contribute to grand challenges of broader societal objectives. So the idea is that when we look at public organization, if they want to implement open innovation, procurement is the area that is one of the most promising in this sense. And this is also in line, if you look what I put in the slide, is the new European Union paradigm for innovation in public procurement. So this new, let's say, framework acknowledge that public organizations need to expand their innovation ecosystem and emphasize the importance of procurement in doing this. And they encourage buyers and procurement professionals to focus on two key aspects: the preparation of the tender and the execution of the contract, because it's important that organizations stay engaged with the supply market if they want to obtain an innovation outcome that is in line with the original expectation. And this is particularly important when they engage with SMEs, startup, innovation agency, living labs, university, because they are the one that holds the higher innovation potential. So stay in touch with them during the innovation process. It's important to deliver a better outcome. So this approach aligns perfectly with the concept of open innovation, because it encourages a collaborative and inclusive process where like diverse stakeholders contribute to the development of innovative public services. So this way we are promoting not only a new approach, but also we ensure that procurement is not just seen as a transactional process, but a strategic tool for societal advancement through the delivery of the innovation. So if we agree about the fact that procurement is a strategic area for implementing open innovation, there are two key questions that we have been trying to answer. The first one is that, okay, but like how can public entities navigate the procurement of innovation initiative projects? And then what strategy can public organization adopt to integrate open innovation into procurement of innovation projects to obtain tangible strategic outcomes? Now, I didn't want to put too much detail in the presentation, but all what I'm going to present is based on, like, it has empirical evidence. So during these years, we've done like several cases, although not super easy to find this type of project, and survey data that led us to the identification of these results. So regarding the characteristic of public procurement project using open innovation. So if you want to manage innovation in procurement using an open approach, what are the key aspects you have to keep in mind? First of all, the purpose, meaning that I already present that we need to move from the traditional private sector concept, like open innovation in the public sector goes beyond just engagement with external sources to make profit or to obtain a market advantage, is a way to manage the innovation better to obtain broader societal goal. Like, you don't do a procurement of innovation project using open innovation to reduce your costs or to increase the quality of public services. You do that extra effort to obtain something higher. Well, I'm saying that because it's important to keep in mind that this type of project need to be differentiated compared to traditionally procurement of innovation project. And I'll get back to you in a second. A first key theme is the use of tools. So OE project, based on our evidence, require the usage of a different type of innovation tools that might not be needed in traditional innovation approaches. We divided in standard and advanced. I'll get back to this in a second. But the other key aspect is collaboration. I know it sounds tautological, but in the public sector is not. Like, open innovation projects are not successful if there is not an actual collaboration in place during the project. And we identify the collaboration along two axes. I'll show you a matrix in a second. We're not talking clearly about external collaboration in terms of engagement with the supply market and the supplier that will deliver the innovation, but it's important also to look at the internal collaboration. So an open innovation project can be just handled by a single agency within an organization. It requires a strong integration with other stakeholders as part of the public entity. Last, there are also some enablers that might favor or not the implementation of open innovation project. One is the type of innovation policy at the country level or at the organizational level, and then the type of support received. Like, there are countries, we found countries or level of government that are more open to favor the introduction of this approach, and others that instead receive less support, also in terms of resources and capabilities. Again, I mentioned the aspect of the tool. One part, I've been studying procurement of innovation for a while, and this is one of the main difference I found is that in open innovation project, there is a lot of use of tools that are not typically used in other type of innovation project in procurement. That I made a differentiation here according to the standard advanced is just something that we have found in our cases. So when I talk about standard innovation tools, I talk about simplifying the procurement process to minimize the burden for both the organization and the supplier, provision of grants or training to innovative supplier to stimulate the engagement with the innovation process, or like from a contract perspective, the incorporation of offset in procurement contract. When we talk about advanced tool, we're going to like additional resources to better engage with the supply market, such as platform to solicit preliminary market consultation with supplier and sharing of ideas. Events where supplier can showcase their innovative solution so that public organization, public entity interested in that innovation can better understand the market, the state of the market. But also during the process, events such like co-design workshop or joint meeting or like structured moment of interaction where there is an idea exchange. These are all aspects that take place during open innovation project in public procurement, which we didn't find in like more typically decision-making separation project, even involving like innovation. So that said, like our main outcome is this matrix that conceptualize what are like the main strategies that can be adopted by public organization if they want to implement open innovation in public procurement. So as you can see, and again, we can discuss, and I'm happy to hear your idea about it. So we use the two axes in terms of collaboration. So one is the level of collaboration and integration across agency, which can be like or internal agency, but also intra-agency. So if we're talking about collaborative innovation within different public organizations, and the other is clearly the engagement of the supply market. And we try to map three types of innovation project. One is the one that we call like multi-governance. The multi-governance is a strategy that emphasizes robust internal collaboration and the utilization of more standard tools to engage with the supply market. And projects that suit this approach usually have specific objectives in mind, operational and strategic. And generally speaking, this is the area that they contribute more, for example, to social sustainability and involve national and international collaboration with other public entities. We found that this strategy is suitable for projects that entail relatively straightforward innovation because they have a limited use of tools to engage with the supply market. And the emphasis is on both intra and inter-agency collaboration. On the other hand, we have the supply market catalyst strategy, which is the strategy that accentuates the imperative of proactively engaging with the supply market. So here we need to use a broader set of tools to foster the supply relationship. And clearly this approach is important in innovation project where the public organization is looking for tailor-made solution with inherent development risks so that they require an engagement with the supplier. The strategy, the type of strategy is usually used for projects where we want to achieve a broader set of objectives, but still like focus. Like for example, in this case, we have those projects that have aimed to, like for example, support local community or support SMEs. So this is the type of strategy that is used when there are these type of societal challenges that are addressed by the project. Last, we have the ecosystem, what we call the ecosystem orchestration. The strategy is the strategy that is characterized by a blend of high agency integration and engagement with the supply market. This is clearly the most relevant for complex project. And this is the one that is able to give a better payoff in terms of strategic outcome that the project is able to achieve once the innovation has been successful delivered. Now, I'm done, but I just want to emphasize that there is a last quadrant. Last quadrant here, that there is when there is no agency integration and no engagement with the supply market. So usually here is where we identify, we call it traditional trading, but this quadrant is the quadrant where non-open innovation procurement of innovation project fits. So whenever you want to introduce an innovation through procurement using a traditional close approach, this is usually what the approach is used, like a limited collaboration between agency and a limited interaction and interface with the supply market or supplier during the project. Clearly, I'm not saying that that's a bad approach. I'm just saying that whenever you want to move from this approach, our cases show that you either have to go to the agency collaboration or to the engagement with the supply market. And I think I'm over time, so that's it. Thank you so much for your attention. Of course, if you have any comment, just please let me know.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, my dear brother. Appreciate your thoughts. Please do stay tuned, for we have just one more presentation, after which we shall follow that up with a question and answer session. And on that account, it is, of course, my privilege to call on Dr. Paul Platinga, Procuring Innovation, the relevance of public official capacities and values. Thank you so much, Paul. Before Paul starts speaking, if you have lost a phone, come make very innovative representations why I should not keep it.
Is this working? Oh, sure. Is that all right? Yep. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Being the last session or the last presentation, I think you must be the dedicated people. So it's a privilege to have you listening, and I'm sure you're all very awake. So I've actually, just because I've now been here for 3 days and I've had an opportunity to listen to everything else, I decided to really revamp my presentation and because everyone's already spoken about more strategic elements of procurement of innovation and innovation procurement, I thought I'd focus on some of the more micro level experiences that we had many years ago with open innovation in the public sector. So it's good it follows this last presentation. And hopefully there's something interesting that comes out of those. And then I will still comment on a couple of the more broader topics that I've been exploring more recently. Oh, sorry, I need to do this. So just as a quick background, I'm not going to go into this much, but I'm from the Human Sciences Research Council, so one of the 5 or 6 or 7 research councils in the country. As you can see, it's really focusing on social science and social science that makes a difference. So ideally, more applied research that's informing decision-making in the policy sphere, civil society, etc. One of the projects I manage is called the Policy Action Network. It was established with the DSI many years ago, so I joined fairly recently. And we do a lot of work on the relationship between research and policy, and there's a number of initiatives there. Many of them are quite technology-oriented, and what I'm going to speak to today connects with a few of those initiatives. And actually, what's most relevant, I think, to this conference is 3 intersecting areas of work. The one is around open government. I'll start with that. And that's really, it starts off with accountability, but it is a little bit broader than that in the sense that open governance, especially when you go into spaces like open data, civic technology, it's about innovation opportunities and even economic development opportunities. But ultimately, it's about the opening of government. And I think the one thing to highlight here that's relevant to this space is initiatives around open contracting partnerships, open contracting data standard, if you haven't seen that, which I think can be a very useful complement to what's been done around procurement of innovation and transparency, etc. So from a governance perspective, quite useful. Another area that we're working on is around engaged research. That's very much the relationship between researchers and society, so communities, also from a tech transfer perspective, so commercialization, that kind of thing, as well as evidence brokering, so evidence synthesis, those kinds of initiatives, and especially with government partners. And then the one I'll focus on today is around public sector innovation, and of course then the procurement of innovation as a personal focus. We don't do much of work in this space. You might have seen Glenda and Amy's presentation on Monday. We do a lot of work around indicators and innovation, not so much around innovation practices, etc. So that's fairly under-researched for us and underworked by us. This is just to give you a sense of who we are working with in these areas, just to highlight, and as I mentioned on Monday, we're working with the NRF. We're just starting to work with the NRF on a fairly large engaged research project. And then otherwise, I think as Isaiah mentioned previously, and the one I'll touch on today, the open innovation, public sector innovation with City of Tshwane and others. And then most of the open government work is happening under the broader open government partnership umbrella, which is largely with DPSA, but there's a much bigger community in that space. So if you are interested in it, welcome discussions, because it's an area that the country is trying to revitalize. So something to come back to if you're interested. And also around civic technology, e-participation with Department of Science and Innovation, with municipalities actually. As mentioned, I'm going to focus on the procurement of innovation and a specific case study. So I'm going to call it a case study. I used to manage this when I was in provincial government, in Gauteng provincial government. And I realize now that that was launched in 2013. So it's the 10-year anniversary of it having been launched. So for whatever reason, this is some kind of fate. So I'm going to share a bit of it. These I've extracted slides from my old CEO's presentation that is publicly online. So I've tried to just keep it public because I'm not actually part of the organization anymore. But just to show you what he presented, I think this was somewhere around 2015, once we'd been a couple of years through the program. So this was an open innovation, as it was called, an open innovation. I think it was called a solution exchange in those days. It's now called OpenIX. And essentially the provincial government was wanting to set up a platform to do everything that's been talked about here. So the idea was that, and this was launched with City of Tshwane actually, because we were based in the city. So the idea, and fairly simple, is that you have seekers, which are your public or private sector entities looking to solve a problem. And you have providers, which would be the technology providers, and you would connect them via this platform. There is a technology element to it, but I would say that's probably only about 5% of what we did was the actual technology platform. 95% was actual groundwork, which I'll explain in a second. I'll come to some of the nuances in a second. Just to give you a sense of what we did. So in that period, I think for roughly 3 years, we ran about 50 of these open innovation challenges. So it was very much a challenge-based open innovation platform. We did do some other forms of open innovation in that process, but I'm just focusing on the challenge-based approach. This one is an example of a challenge brief that we did for a large rail state-owned enterprise, state-owned company in the country. And I'm not sure if you would remember, there was a major accident on one of the rail lines during that period, and they were looking for solutions to address, to stop cars driving onto tracks, especially in rural areas where there are fewer barriers. And then we did many of these kinds of challenge briefs for a variety of partners. So everyone from Eskom to Rand Water. So about 50% were public sector, 50% were private sector, as well as municipalities, of course. So this is what I'll just give you a sense of what a typical challenge brief looked like. So it was usually a 2-page document. I'll comment on some of the details. It's intentionally blurry. Well, not intentionally, it just is. That's how it is in the presentation, but you don't need to read it. But that's what a typical challenge brief would look like, and it's a very standard template. And this is what most of these open innovation platforms would do. So we followed very much what 9 Sigma and others were doing back then and still are doing these days as commercial platforms. So the ideas with the challenge brief is that you would outline what the business opportunity is, and actually business opportunities importantly. So it may not be a direct form of procurement. There could be other forms of collaboration, such as joint venture, etc. So the client would outline those opportunities that they were willing to, those business arrangements or models that they were willing to go into. They would, of course, indicate what levels of technology maturity they were willing to work with. Importantly, under the key specifications, they were looking at the goals primarily. There were some criteria that would be more traditional to a product procurement, but the majority of the specifications were goal type criteria. You would also include things like possible approaches. So you give ideas of the spectrum of possible innovations you would consider, and then also solutions not of interest, so anything that would not fit within your environment. So just as an example of what you would see, I do want to comment on how it's framed. I think probably the most important thing here to highlight, just in terms of how a challenge brief is constructed, is that, as you will see in this one, the way it's phrased was we would spend days working out how to draft this challenge brief in consultation with the clients, with partners, etc., and trying to write it up in a way that is sufficiently open that it could attract solutions to the problem that were not from the core supplier base that they would usually work with. So as you can imagine, in this kind of scenario, you have lots of suppliers of boom gates, is the traditional model. So we specifically didn't want to say, we want boom gates for this solution. We said an active traffic control device to minimize the risk of vehicles entering railway crossings. So active traffic control device opens it up to potentially a range of solutions. That could be, for example, a radio alert that automatically triggers when you come near a railway crossing. So it could be something of that kind, or it could be boom gates of different forms or barriers of different forms. So you can imagine that there's now potentially a much broader spectrum. It could even be theoretically, and actually we had this with City of Tshwane quite often, more community-based solutions. So are there social arrangements, for example, villages in the area of these crossings that could be drawn on to address the problem? It might be education, awareness, those kinds of things. That was a reminder that I'm running out of time. So this, again, sorry, these are very poor graphics just because I've drawn from that public presentation. The links there, you could probably see if it's better quality there. Just to give you a sense of what, and it's funny to look back now because the graphs are very grainy and old school, but you'll see some of the data on these types of challenges at this point. I forget what stage it was at. But just to give you a sense of who was participating in these challenges. So for example, if we had, I don't know, maybe we'd run about 20 challenges at this point. Most SMEs were 75% of the participants. We also had large corporates, including international contributors, as well as 17% individuals. In terms of technology maturity, you can see there's quite a mix. I think ready to commercialize was 50%, so the majority were the rest, another high percentage was for prototypes. And then in this case, it was provincially oriented, but we were looking beyond the province. So the majority were from Gauteng, but then also from other regions. I think in this case, at this point, I think this might have been for the specific challenge. We were restricting to South Africa, but for many of the other challenges, we were drawing from other countries as well. Anyway. So these are just some of the points that I wanted to highlight from some of that experience. As you could tell, this was effectively a public intermediary that was established to facilitate connections between innovators and the clients or the users. So that's just something to keep in mind. We worked with a private entity in the initial phases to get it started and on an ongoing basis as well to enhance our capacity. Something to note in terms of the roles that were involved in defining challenges, running the process from a client side, we would typically work on a kind of rule of thumb of 3 specific roles. There would be the sponsor, so the business sponsor, the legal, so that would include supply chain usually, as well as then the technical specialists who had familiarity with the issue itself. So that was our default. And we would always look to have those 3 people in meetings when we were looking to run these kinds of challenges. We would work through a 4-stage process. And essentially those 4 stages are listed there. I just wanted to highlight the first 2 stages. The first is the challenge definition where, and I just pulled this from the Treasury Strategic Purchasing document, just to give you a sense of that we were doing a similar thing, although this is a much wider, the document is much broader. But essentially, the idea was that you're shifting your resources to the earlier stages of the procurement process. So you're investing a lot more time in defining the challenge in a sufficiently open way that could attract the types of innovators you're looking for. And a couple of other points just to highlight in terms of developing a challenge brief. One of the things that you might have seen is to have a very clear intellectual property position. And that linked to, and as has been discussed today, that linked to the need for these entities to have an IP policy And I remember working with some of these entities on IP policy and explicitly discouraging them from looking to own IP, and them being determined to own IP. And for us, and one of the reasons we really look to discourage this is just because of the maintenance costs around IP, especially patents, and the administrative burden that it brings without a clear business case. So I think this has been highlighted by Prof. Ukens but there is a need to have a clear licensing approach, that you're not locked out of the investments you've made through these kinds of processes. So ownership and licensing need to be very clearly separated and understood. The important thing then with the challenge definition, also in that framing or the design of the brief, is to target adjacent sectors. And that was a big focus of us, to say what is adjacent to the railway boom industry. And that might be the house construction industry, or it could be the IT sector, etc. So we explicitly were looking to frame challenges to address adjacent sectors. Importantly, then getting to connect to the innovation ecosystem, and that was really a very active outreach. So compared to a normal tender RFQ process, we would actively reach out, and we had to convince people to respond to these opportunities, because they would, perhaps they're reluctant to engage in the government tender. So we would need to convince them that this is a viable opportunity. The client is taking it seriously, etc. Part of that was actively reaching out to adjacent sectors that we thought could provide solutions. So that's why we needed quite a strong technical team. Part of it was also from an IP perspective, again, to say we want the providers to explain, when they're providing the responses to these challenges, to explain what they're doing, not how. So it creates some boundaries around what kind of information they're sharing, because it goes into a consultative process. And a few other points, which I'm not going to go into. Then lastly, and I'm going to jump a couple of steps because we're running out of time. I think importantly, as I said earlier, this is really then plugs into the broader strategic environment. I think it was Louise earlier speaking, and I just plugged this in because I think that creates the broader frame in which this kind of process happens. And one of the points that was raised, which connects with my last slide, is just around ultimately building capacity, and importantly, and that's become much more of a focus of my work personally, is around understanding the values of the different stakeholders, especially within the client's public sector environment. And that goes back to what I said earlier about those three different roles: the sponsor, the legal, the technical. And for us, it was about starting to understand those roles much more clearly in terms of what each of those roles was looking for, because often they're in conflict. So your business unit manager and supply chain team are often at odds because they're looking to implement something. The unit's looking to implement something, the supply chain team is seen as creating barriers. And perhaps I can just start with this, is to say, as I said on Monday, I think for us, in terms of when speaking about innovation culture, the starting point is to start with respect for each other's professions and the values that are associated with those professions as the starting point, before you look to talk about an innovation culture. Because pushing the innovation culture argument can immediately start alienating certain people, because the technical specialists are often the people that are saying, we have the knowledge, we know what needs to be done, and that immediately alienates other stakeholders. So for me, and this is, I think this just became a theme, is just starting to understand those values. I was just waiting for you to start moving up here. So starting to look at those values. And this is just some of the current work. You might not be able to see it very clearly, but what we started doing is to just start mapping out the different roles or units within an entity that we're working with. So you have your service delivery units, the RD, the research development KM units. There might be economic development, and then of course supply chain, procurement, finance, and they all have different innovation goals. Ultimately, they have innovation in mind in different ways, but the goals are slightly different. So they're all ultimately looking to improve or change what they do, but those goals are slightly different. So one of the points is, of course, how do you look at where there might be alignment between goals? Yeah, another important thing, and this builds on work that's been done. I think it comes out of Estonia as well, and some of the work they've done around the space is looking at legitimacy of those different actors and enhancing legitimacy and looking at what resources they have to support that legitimacy in these kinds of processes. So that might be more infrastructural resource related, or it could be technical. And then lastly, that links to the capacities and values in terms of prioritizing things like transparency and fairness, which again, as I was saying on Monday, something like fairness as a principle, which is really common to the procurement space, is actually quite valuable to open innovation, because as an entrepreneur who's looking to participate in an open innovation challenge, I need to know that the process will be fair and transparent. So there's an immediate opportunity to find opportunities for shared values, rather than saying, all of these supply chain values are a conflict with innovation. So I think there's an opportunity for much more complementarity. There might be differences, but I think there's much more space to align. And I think that is it. My email address, if you'd like to be in touch. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Stay on stage, Paul. Ron as well is on stage. Andrea as well is on stage. You guys all know the drill now. So we take Prof. G, how much time do you give me? Because I really do not want to go more than what I have been allocated. The time is 16:41 now. So, okay, so we've got 14 minutes. So I propose 2 questions each, or rather 6 questions, or however they might be directed. So I'm going to take 6 hands, and hand 1 is going to say, for argument's sake, my question is to Paul. Ask the question and. So you may field 6 questions, you may field none, you may field a combination of anything between 0 to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2 slots available. 1 slot available, 5. And there will no be 5A or 5B here. Gio. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Going once. Going twice. Do we put Walter Bengo on the spot again today, like we did yesterday? Oh, 6. Okay, there he is. Welcome back, Walter. We missed you yet today. You know the drill. As soon as 1 is done, 2 goes. The first word, the name of the person to whom you are directing your question. Let's go. You, Bob.
Me, okay. To Paul, just wondering the differences now as to when you first encountered and was working on those kind of challenges and challenge funds. It's quite a long time since quite a lot of things have changed, probably in context. But can you just make a couple of comments on that? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mine is directed to the colleague from the NRF. The question is very simple. What are the processes of engaging with the opportunities that you've highlighted? It also goes to Paul from your institution.
Very well. Maybe
can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Chief. My question is, how do people engage with the opportunities that you have highlighted? And it also applies to Paul in terms of then widening the net in terms of the skills base and the real focus in terms of the procurement space. Thanks.
Okay, 3 is not 5, so if it has 3A and 3B, it's not 5A.
Absolutely not, Jonathan. Absolutely not.
Well, okay, then 3 is a little bit bigger than it was going to be, but that's okay. So really appreciated all 3 presentations, but I've got this big question now for Paul. One is doing a project now on sustainable public procurement for a Gauteng provincial department. I'd like you to explain just a little bit more that idea of adjacent sectors. I'm finding in the, it's a sustainable public procurement, sometimes understood as green, and it's interesting thinking about its propagation through the provincial government. So I think I'm helping you on your 10-year memory lane here. And then the other one is on, no, it's not another one, it's the same one. The creative procurement, at local level, I was very interested, I think this connects to your current work. I was very interested when I talked to that Treasury official that she seemed to say the main constituency there wasn't the SEM officers. So it's not the finance and procurement professionals, it is the economic development officers. And I just wonder if you've got any insight on that or comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mane. My question is to Ron. I just want to find out on the big project like the SKN that you were involved in, from the procurement side of it, were there instances where you had not to follow prescribed government processes? If yes, how did you go around it? Thanks.
Right. So my question is to Andrea. On your slide, the characteristics of public procurement projects using open innovation, you had the standard and the advanced tools. And then under the advanced, you had platforms to solicit preliminary design ideas. So I would be very interested if you could just perhaps elaborate on that a little bit. I'm interested to understand whether those platforms are populated by public sector clients, mediated by, some third party, also public sector. I'm interested in understanding how that demand is formulated or that invitation, whatever it might be on that platform, and how does it get there? Thanks.
My question is for Paul. Sorry, it looks like you've got lots of questions. But mine is on the use of generative AI as a project management tool. Because obviously when you speak about capacities, right, you talk about public officials, but also, as I said yesterday, in a different platform, to say that sometimes we need to be able to remove some of the functions of officials so that they can focus on more detailed and more complex work. So what do you think the role of generative AI is within the space of project management in some of the projects that you would have spoken about today? Thanks.
Responses in this order. We go to Paul, because he has a lot of ground to cover, then Andrea, and then final contributions will come from Ron. Paul, please go ahead, switch on your mic. There's still a cell phone that is not claimed. Nobody has made any representations. At the end of this conference, I'm going to assume the owner is not from the conference.
Okay, thanks. All right, I'm going to try track these. So just to, I think, Barbara, the question differences now. So just I'll give you some of the story that happened actually since I left. One of the decisions was to move to a more technology platform-based approach. So we, as I say, we intentionally didn't invest much in the technology platform. So I think, when people talk about platforms, they often think about Amazon, a marketplace type model where people can find each other automatically. So we intentionally didn't do that. We believed in having to do a much more personal approach where people literally on the phone, phoning all around the world. So we spent, these are expensive processes, to be honest. So there was, and partly it's a budget thing, is that there was a shift to redeveloping the technology sites that it was used as the platform to connect people. Sorry, I'm speaking to the mic. Yeah, I can't really comment on the outcomes and whether that's better or worse, or I shouldn't. Yeah, so that's an interesting one, and it's something I think to explore, and perhaps it comes back to your question a bit later. I think one of the big issues, and Isaiah has touched on it, is perhaps fatigue in the space because of the lack of post-pilot adoption. So we had a lot of pilot projects. We were usually in those days we were working in the 500,000 range because of that. We saw that as for pilots because of procurement, thresholds, etc. We felt that was a safe space to work in terms of this process. So there's more space now. But that scale on, we did develop guidelines. We did have some cases that went further, but I think the big thing, and maybe it's not a change, it's just something that's not really been reflected on fully and then systematically integrated into improving how things were done. So there's movement now on the procurement bill, etc., which is interesting, opens up the space. One of the things, I think there's practices, and this maybe goes to an adjacent sector topic, is just the changes in the kind of IT software development sector in terms of agile development. And it's interesting to see that now, because it's in some ways there's a lot to learn from what's been happening there in terms of defining outcomes and then having a developer team work in an agile way to reach that outcome rather than developing a functional design, which is what the traditional approach was. So I think there's something that now this whole space can learn from what's been happening in the agile world in software development, that we can, and if Sita, I did see Sita's name somewhere, so I was just interested if they were here to speak to that, if they've seen agile practices in contracting coming in, because that's a huge change. Then just to your question, can I just lump yours in before Ron gets to it? In terms of widening the space on that project, the big focus, and that was a balance of priorities, was small enterprises, local innovators, grassroots, as Anita works in. A lot of the focus was on that community and bringing them into and expanding access to procurement opportunities to that community. That was the provincial government's priority, and it became stronger through the project. So the challenges, and actually the newer challenges, have even become more oriented to widening the base of participation. I can't remember if there's any kind of gender responsive. I haven't really looked. So yeah, maybe we can come back to that one if you want to. Jonathan, on sustainable procurement and adjacent sectors. Yeah, I mean, sustainable is just such a cross-cutting theme that it's quite, I mean, there are technical aspects of, say, clean tech that are, then you might speak to adjacency. But it's already draws on so much adjacent knowledge in chemistry, chemicals, etc., that is actually a really difficult question, to be honest, because I mean, yeah, I mean, it just, a lot of what you're drawing on is in adjacent sectors, and the example I used was, I'm trying to think of a good one from one of the other challenges, but it would usually be looking at something that was close, but you would need some adjustment in terms of what kind of resources were needed, what knowledge was needed. And maybe I'll come back to it with an example that's a bit better. The creative procurement, and interesting, your focus on economic development. I got a lot of questions here. Economic development. Yeah, so I'll just leave Jonathan's hard one. The economic development, yeah, that's an interesting point, and actually that's why. And you might have seen my last table. We had it's those four. We had four actors: economic development, supply chain, etc. And that's something we were always dealing with. Is this an economic development kind of initiative because we're broadening the supplier base, or is it a social benefits innovation initiative? So we were always, that's something, and actually we debated removing some of that in the vision statement, and the mission is like, should our mission be more economic or should it be more benefit for clients? And because we are half private public, we also had that dilemma. Is it commercial benefit or is it public sector benefit? So we were just in a bit of a mess around who it all was for. And then generative AI, actually, then it comes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of automating generative AI. I think great for synthesizing and for language. We work in the AI space, so I have reservations about its logic abilities. But I think in terms of being able to synthesize large amounts of content, we're actually experimenting with it with municipalities, etc., around, say, IDP engagement, but with a lot of caution around, from the provenance of information. We're trying to build in all those kind of guardrails, etc. When you work with it. So it's just about building those, experimenting with it, and there's lots of guidelines coming out from UK local government authorities on using generative AI, etc. So yeah, great space to explore, but we're actually trying to push people to look at data, to understand data first, and then they can understand okay, how these AI related across the board, including generative AI, can be used in a responsible way. Yeah.
Andrea?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I didn't see who made the question, but that was a very interesting question about the platform. So the answer is yes. So in the cases and the evidence we saw is that when platform were used to facilitate the connection with the supply market, there was some sort of moderation. For example, we had a couple of projects that were European initiatives. So there were at the country level, for example, for energy efficient system, for catering services, and they were supported with additional funding by the European Union. And in that case, the European Union made available a platform where supplier could submit their preliminary ideas, and this information were managed directly by the office of the European Union to ensure that, again, the evaluation was fair, the process was transparent, and everything. So that was a case where there was support from the European Union. In another case of a European initiative, still supported by the European Union, we had one of the participating country where one of the agencies in the country already have a system platform in place for this type of challenging. They were not specific for the supplier. They were just for like a platform like citizen.gov, like to collect ideas from the general public and the general audience. It was repurposed for the project to be used to support preliminary market consultation with the supplier. But in that case, they used just a resource from an agency that was not involved in the procurement to support the project. But in that case, there was no like external moderation. It was just like an internal resource that was used. And the third case, we had another project in the United States, and it was also a collaboration between different states, and NASPO made available a part of their platform, Value Point, to collect preliminary requests for information and submission of information by the supplier about a specific innovation ideas. But in that case, there was no moderation. The information was directly then forwarded to the states, which then, I would have evaluated according to their criteria. The common denominator of this is the fact that these were all. Okay, our power is off.
they're offering to include the life cycle of that solution and to cost the life cycle of that solution. So, I mean, I can see I cannot think of a reason why that would be different simply because you don't know upfront what the solution is going to be. And then you're still comparing life cycle with life cycle, but it might be, life cycle of a concrete barrier with life cycle of a tar spray or whatever the other solution might be.
Are we back live? Sorry, Jane.
That's okay. I'm just about to take the Uber because we're flying out this evening. But I didn't want to leave without saying an enormous thank you. It really, really has been a superb conference. And I would really like to publicly express my thanks to, of course, Professor Kino, but the organising team here, all of them. I mean, fantastic. But an absolutely first-class chairing. Come on, that's amazing. But I just really want to wish all of you all the very best. Please do share my slides, and I'm very happy to connect on LinkedIn and hope to see you all again. Thank you very much.
Certainly. Thank you, Jane. Go well. Thank you very, very much. Is Andrea on? We've lost him. Unfortunately, we have lost Andrea, so it falls to you, Ron, to conclude the substantive contributions to this conference.
Well, I'll just answer the questions. Here's going to conclude and close. So the person who asked the question has left. No? So the person who left the question has left, but I'm going to assume you do want an answer. So I'm dealing with the second one first, which was, she's here, but he's gone. So on the second question, it was, were SKA projects subject to all the prescripts? And if so, how did we get around them? And the answer very quickly is yes. When the SKA project was inherited by the NRF, they were subject to all the prescripts. We actually did formally approach National Treasury for exemption for that particular project, and they turned us down. We think they made a mistake, and I know exactly who it was, but I won't mention the person's name. So as a result, we then had to conform to every single prescript that was there. How did we get around it? Well, we didn't do anything illegal or unethical. We used the particular mechanism that was there, which was called deviations. And we had a multitude of deviations. So much so that somebody from National Treasury once leaked to the press who were all the deviations people. And we were ranked number 12 in the country, and it was like, very negative. If you have deviation, there's something wrong with you. And we took offense at that. We were doing what was right, and we had no other choice or option. We also became experts at deviations. We wrote, and Sean Scott was the one who compiled it, but it's the best I've seen in the world, a very comprehensive guideline on deviations, and we gave formal training. I haven't seen anything close to that anywhere, on that. So thank you for that. And I, of course, had to fight the fires. I'm the chief firefighter, so the auditors and National Treasury were all over us about these things, and I had to fight everybody off. So that was my own introduction. Then the first question. The first question was really, how do people get to know of and engage with our opportunities? And a bit of history there. Up until 2018, the NRF did not have the mandate to do what is known as tech transfer or commercialization. When, of course, the SKA project came along, we then had to change our legislative mandate, and of course we then beefed up our staffing capacity, created a commercialization office in Cape Town for the South African Radio Observatory. Now, I haven't been involved at all, so I'm going to give you from where I sit, the very little I know. Cheryl, I might call upon you if you know a little bit more than me, because you may be closer. I've checked the online staff. All our Cape Town staff have left there on the plan, and I've checked on the online staff. Our commercialization people aren't online. But essentially, there were two different key opportunities that I'm aware of. The one was at the development stage, where you co-developed at the beginning, and at the beginning, a choice was provided. Are we going to go a procurement route, or are we going to go a so-called grant funding route? We decided it was easier going a grant funding route. So SCM weren't involved, and we've had no comeback on that. On the commercialization, we had a commitment when we took on the international obligation, because we argued there'd be a lot of job creation, economic growth, a whole lot of positive spillover effects, positive externalities. And so we are now starting to see these opportunities arrive. We had a specialist manager driving, in fact, our whole office driving commercialization. She was then promoted to the managing director role. And so I don't know the answer to that one, and I'm happy that you send us an email and we'll respond. Cheryl, do you have any more information over and above what I've said?
No, I think the safest is to get the thorough response from the MD, like you are indicating. But I think, Ron, while you are there, I really would also just want to commend the team when you speak about the deviations that were done for the project to make it successful. So I think NRF is blessed to have a head of SCM and an SCM team that knows how to stick within the compliance requirements and make sure that the projects are not penalized, they're still successful. And I think that's one of the very unique skills that that NRF has, I've witnessed. I'm also in the BAC committee for the NRF. We see how well drafted those deviations are. And then you don't get surprised when you see the projects really succeeding. And we're still maintaining a clean audit. Thank you.
Thank you. And so Lebogang and Ndiwe, well done, colleagues. This is a real feather in your cap. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. That concludes, in any way you look at it, session 4 of this conference, which is the last session of this conference. The only thing that stands in the way between ourselves and the traffic jam outside is Gio and the distribution of the gifts and his closing remarks. And of course, it is appropriate for me to express my own personal thanks in the way in which we have worked together. Of course, your colleagues, some of them have left. Please extend my gratitude to them for how they have conducted themselves in this conference, how they have engaged, how they have kept to time, and to the extent that time ran away with us, how we were able to work with each other to cover time. We'll blame ESCOM for the fact that now it's 17:18, and if everything had happened without ESCOM's intervention, we really would be done here some full 18 minutes. Okay. What is this? Paul, what is this? Guys, thank you. I appreciate your time and audience, and I look forward to engaging with you.
It's not often that I get the pleasure to try one of his tricks on him. Colleagues, I know that it's way over time, but please do allow me just to quickly conclude. I had a beautiful slides. I'm not going to really go through it. Allow me just 1 or 2 seconds to just say 1 or 2 really critical things. Can you just quickly just pull up the slide for me there so that I could just share with the colleagues 1 or 2 important things, not to leave it hanging. I think it is quite important when one gets to the end of a conference, especially a conference of this nature, which was never meant to just be an academic engagement. You know, us academics like to sit in rooms and just exchange thoughts. The value of that only goes that far. I always think I want to walk away from a conference with something concrete, something real, in addition to nice new thoughts. So I thought it's quite important for us to just quickly share some thoughts. We'll be there in a sec. Hang on, keeping you all in suspense. Please. Professor Knight, please.
On behalf also of those who've already had to leave, those of us that you invited from far afield, so thank you very much. And Jane's comments stand for all of us, I think. So please keep in touch.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Are we close? Not close? Not close? I'm getting a shake of the head.
2-3 minutes.
Okay, let me start at the tail end, and then we see if we've got if we can bring it up. I can come back. Okay, so where do we go from here? So there are a couple of immediate steps, and then a few longer term steps. Firstly, you will remember that the Deputy Director General, when he delivered the welcome on behalf of the Minister, explicitly asked us to provide the department with a memo setting out the key learnings from this event so that they can insert it into their engagement medium-term planning within their sector that's coming up next month, and that will include the President. So that will be done, right? There's no doubt about it. Between myself and Ron's team, we will make sure that that gets to the DDG and can be fed indirectly into their policy planning processes. Secondly, what we will then also do is we are going to extract from the complete record. You would have seen Sean and his team has been here throughout. And one of the things that they will be doing is to create a complete record of the event. They've got a complete recording, multiple places. They will create the transcript and from that do a record. That will enable us to write up a number of, at least one, but probably more, short briefing papers, bite size, again, not more than 2 pages, something that one can put in front of an accounting officer to just say, what is this thing? Public procurement and innovation. What are we talking about? Just to register some of the issues that we've been talking about, especially the low-hanging fruit issues, the things that we think we can immediately move on. Also to sensitize the entire ecosystem to this idea. So that we will also do. Then thirdly, the more ambitious part of the output is that we are planning to do a proper edited collection book, putting together some of the presentations that you've seen, some of the papers that's been delivered. That will be a proper academic exercise with peer review and the rest, to create not only a resource in the local context, but also to create, is it up and running now? Oh, there we go. Okay. Let me quickly just click through. Oh. There we go. Okay, so let me go back to that. Pause that thought. Firstly, I just wanted to show you we're not alone. I'm sure you can't see the date there, but it's the 13th of November. That was Monday. The UK Cabinet Office issued this guidance under their new act. Transforming public procurement, our innovation ambition. This is exactly what we've been talking about here. So the UK on Monday got a guidance under the new act, exactly what we're talking about here, right? So we are keeping good company. Then what now, right? So I've spoken about the memo. Oh, there's something I forgot. See, I need the pictures. So from the conference itself, we are going to make all the presentations as well as some of the documents that's been referred to that's in the public domain, like Professor Knight's inaugural she referred to. There are a few other documents. We will make all of that available to you online and you can download it, right? If you've registered, we'll have your contact details. You will get within, please just don't email me on Friday for it. I need to travel back to my office first. But within the next week or two, all of that will be uploaded for you on a portal online where you can just download it, right? A number of the presentations contained really valuable information, links, things that you want to read up further. You will have access to all of that. So keep an eye out for that email from us and you can download it. Then those policy briefs that I was talking about, the book that I was talking about, so the book
not only will serve as a first local resource for further engagements, but also to start to build the literature. You'll remember that on our very first invitation, when we started talking about this event, we said it's not only the practice where we're not seeing action here, we're also not seeing the literature locally being developed. And this is an attempt on our side to start also building literature in this area. Then we will continue to support, bring together, create, strengthen the community of practice. Those of you that knows me and has been kind of involved in some of the projects that I do will know this is one of the things that I'm very passionate about, and we will continue to do that. I think we've made great progress in this event to bring the innovation and procurement communities together, and I think we need to strengthen that community. We will continue to do that work. So watch out for invitations to further events and engagements. And then what we will also do, and you've heard now the official announcement a moment ago, we will continue to conference. We will continue to do exactly what we've done here. Might be different formats, doesn't matter. We will continue to do this work. Then the very last thing from you, a few words of thanks. Please allow me to say these few important words of thanks. Firstly, our sincere collective thanks to the NRF. To Mr. Bishan Singh, the acting CEO and CFO, unfortunately I had to run to another event, but I'm sure Ron will convey our thanks, and to Ron, the head of procurement, and his entire team that's worked tirelessly for this event. Thanks to the NRF for their insight to call for this event and then making the resources available to make it a reality. I think that they, again, have served the South African and African community really well in this regard. To all the speakers, thank you so much for just freely giving your time, sharing your insights with us. It has been incredible. And a special word of thanks to our foreign guests. I quickly did a bit of math, and collectively, they've traveled 55,000 kilometers between them to be here with us. Yeah. And now they're going to travel 55,000 kilometers back, right? That's something. That says something. So to all our foreign guests, we are absolutely blessed with your presence here. Thank you so much. To all the delegates for joining us, especially this last crowd, thank you so much. Without participants, there's no point in doing any of this. Thanks for being here. Thanks for engaging. That's what it's all about. And then to my team who helped put all of this together. Firstly, to Mr. Zongezo Mbetre, thank you for always being entertaining. Thank you for always being robust. Thank you for always being cultivated. So I want to give you a small something to say thanks. Then a very warm word of thanks from me, but also from all our guests, to the NRF team that's just been superb these last few days, running up and down, doing all kinds of stuff that I can guarantee you is not in their job description. I hope somebody is going to take note that the KPIs, at least in this year's assessment, must be flexibly assessed. Lebogang, Masoma, Matau, Maloma, Matau in that. Oh, there's Matau. To both of you, thank you so much. We could not have done it without you. Just always being available, always running up and down for us, answering emails like that. Great, guys. We are just so thankful for everything you've done. And I want to give each one of you also something. And then finally, truly my own team within my own office, Vuyiseka class, are very capable, long-suffering, very patient with me, project manager, to doing it always with patience and real style. Vuyiseka, thank you so much. I could not have done it without you. So I am going to give you a bottle of wine, but I know you have to carry it back to Stellenbosch, but I am going to do it. I was close. And then finally, to our event managers, Immaculate Events, especially Taryn Brandt. And I'll give hers outside to her. Thank you so much for all the logistics. It's been a rough ride. I must admit, new cost containment measures from National Treasury didn't make it easy for us midstream. But with lots of logistical support, we got here. And I'm very grateful for all the support. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, I declare this event closed. I see Ron has got his hand up, so you've got the very last contribution from the floor.
Here, I don't think you'll mind this one. The one thing you keep reminding us about in terms of the Constitution is cooperative governance. And what I'm hearing from you is that this may be the start of a movement, a community of practice. And why it's linked to cooperative governance is that I would suggest you hear from the floor what they would like to see going forward. And I just want to particularly refer to Anita and her suggestion that they are happy to drive and run with things, and hear from others what they'd like to see going forward and what they'd like to contribute, if anything. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ron. Very good idea. I propose what we do is we'll reach out to all delegates who registered. We'll design something, send out a request to everyone. So please respond to that. Give us ideas. Great idea. Thanks, Ron. And we'll take it from there further. Thank you very much. And now, finally,